It was interesting preparing for a workshop on something that's largely nonverbal. So I came up with some practices and I also did some research. I worked with my own teachers in the Himalayan tradition, which is a yoga meditation tradition. And I also looked at Adyashanti and Muji, who's another non-dual teacher, all non-dual teachers, Eckhart Tolle, Gangaji, a few different people, and just looked to see what they had to say about awareness or enlightenment. And the reason that I feel it's important to understand some of that is because we tend to have a lot of ideas about what it is that we're looking for. I don't have the bad connotations with that I think some people tend to do. I don't think that we're all trying to escape reality. I think there's an impulse or an urge that we have that is actually wholesome, and that it's trying to find the source. We have a sense of presence. We know that we exist. We know our daily lives exist. We sure know that we have a mind and that we have lots of thoughts, because the mind is very insistent. And most of us, I think, I'm sure all of us here have a sense that there's something more than that. And I think most people have that sense that there's something more than our physical bodies and our lives. So the whole daily life, in some non-dual circles and some spiritual circles, there's almost a snobbery around daily life, that daily life is not the point of daily life, which I've always thought was kind of interesting, that there's that kind of snobbish quality to it, that it's really important that we can hang out in awareness or bliss states, but what good does that really do if we're not actually functional in our daily lives? A lot of the times when we're seeking something spiritually, we're seeking something that is a state of joy or a state of stillness. And we hear so much in spiritual circles in the media, I was going to say, but I don't know if it's so much the media as the kinds of circles that many of us are in, about kundalini experiences and energy and bliss and joy. And I think a lot of us have been around for a while, and we've experienced different teachers. We've had different experiences. One of the things that my meditation teacher talked about right away at the beginning was that awareness and consciousness and bliss are not something to be sought after. That if we work with our mind and we purify our lives so that we're not, like, something really simple would be, if you've just been to a really violent movie, you're going to have those images in your mind, and your nervous system is going to be all stirred up because of it. And certainly over the last several years of working with my own trauma and with other people around trauma, I really know the impact of trauma on the nervous system and how that actually works. We have a lot of different elements that are coming together to produce our experience. And it's good to be clear about what we're looking for and what we're not. So silence, stillness, and awareness are natural to us. That's our true nature, is joy and stillness and silence. And then we also have whatever's going on in our minds and our bodies and our nervous systems. And we can work with all of that to bring the separation to a close, so that we realize that in fact our lives are not any separate. They're not separate at all from the absolute or consciousness or our being. So one of the ways that I think the last quote was from Muji is, you are life and you are witnessing life occurring in you. So there's no separation at all between what we might think of as enlightenment and what we might think of as awareness or daily life or any of those things. Those are all one. So I wanted to do a few practices too to work with that in a few minutes. The way that our system works as a person is we have 5 layers that cover or surround our being. So again, this is from yoga meditation tradition. And so we have our physical body that's made of food. This is the lowest level of vibration. It's the most solid part of us. We have our breath and energy. we can work with energy, and anyone who's doing the living inquiries, we work a lot with sensation and energy in our body. So we're talking about that, but we're also talking just about our sense of life and animation and the breath, physical breath as well. The lower level of mind has the thoughts going through it. So those are based on associations, memories, that kind of thing. And we don't decide what our thoughts are going to be. We don't plan our thoughts. Many of us feel like we're at the mercy of our thoughts, especially if we've got a lot of anxiety or worry going on. And the lower level of mind is something that we have to be able to put aside so we're not so focused on it, in order to go into the deeper levels of the mind. The higher level of mind is our intuition and wisdom. And then the idea, one way to explain this would be that the light of our consciousness or being is covered by these sheaths or layers. So as we get higher and higher and closer to the source, then the light is a lot stronger. And the Anandamaya Kosha is the layer of limited bliss and pleasure or joy. There's this feeling from a lot of us that the mind is kind of like an enemy, and that I think the reason that comes up like that a lot of the time is because we don't plan for what's happening in the mind, and because we can get going on the mind has a lot of momentum. So there's 4 parts of the mind. There's our sense of identity, which we need. And in the yoga tradition, that ego, this would be the ego identification. It's not considered a bad thing. It's considered something that's very positive. We need to know who we are, and we need to know our thoughts in our mind, our personality, our body. We need to know if we're hungry. How would we know that? So that's just a very practical sense. Obviously, the ego and the identification with that layer of us, the body and the personality and the mind, has to be worked with in order to get beyond it. But the actual sense of identity is considered to be a good thing. Then we have the 2 layers of thoughts, which we just referred to in the sheaths. So there's the regular thoughts, just the thoughts that are coming through our mind, our thought stream. And then there's the higher level of our mind, which is our intuition and wisdom. And then the storehouse of memories is what gets us really in trouble, because we have our mind, just our whole system draws on what we've learned to date in life. And if we have associations that are negative or traumatic, then they tend to have a lot of energy behind them. And that drives a lot of the thought stream. So the fact that we have this kind of big storehouse of memories is a good thing to know. It explains some of how the mind works. But it also, when we're doing spiritual practices like mantra or meditation, then that storehouse gradually clears out. And when we're doing living inquiries, for instance, and Scott talks about the Velcro effect, and associations, which are images and words, are being stored in the body along with sensation, then those start to release. And this is what is starting to clear out. We have a storehouse of memories that now might feel quite intense, but as time goes on and we work with those, and they become less intense. We don't identify with them as much. They don't seem like they're us the way they might before. So the Himalayan tradition of yoga meditation, Swami Rama, is my home tradition. And he talks about meditation as a way to explore our inner dimensions of life. So I don't want to read everything that's on here, but I wanted to just give you a glimpse of some of what I was looking at as I was preparing for this. One of the things I really noticed was that they all were coming to the same conclusion about things. They were all talking about the same thing. And one of them is that awareness isn't a thought. It's what underlies thought, and it's what underlies everything that we work with. So it's what underlies our life, our emotions, our thoughts, all of that stuff. And then in the tradition of meditation too, he talks about we're not trying to escape our thoughts, and we're trying to really learn how to pay attention. And this piece about not being afraid of our own thinking, I think that's something that has some charge for a lot of people, because we tend to have that momentum in the mind that really seems to take over. And, we might be trying to do a practice of meditation or stillness or something, and then here comes the mind, and it's just like blah, 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 blah. So spiritual seeking sometimes can be seen as a way to escape out of that, the nightmare the mind can be, and that the instruction is to not try to escape, and not to be afraid, just to really turn and start to look at what's going on in our mind. And I found that for me, I really know a lot more about myself through this study of the mind. It's been a good thing to do. And Scott, who we're all familiar with, this is from a blog post of his called The Changing the Paradigm Around Awakening. And Scott talks a lot about avoiding sensation and avoiding energy and feelings, and that seeking awakening is not actually a productive thing to do. For him, his view is that we're much better off to really go directly in and really go into the body, really go into the contraction. And as we clear out what's contracted in our body and what we're resisting, then we automatically have more silence, we automatically have more space, and that the chasing after just the bliss states is not actually all that helpful. And it's not permanent, because if we're going after some kind of pleasure that's not actually our true nature, then something's going to come along to change it. And as soon as it comes along to change it, then we're going to be back in trouble again. So Adyashanti is another American-born spiritual teacher. Many of us are familiar with him. And he also works with our own life as a path to awakening. And Scott actually was telling me one time that he and Ajay had quite a chat. They sat down for a couple of hours and talked. And you can really see the alignment of Scott's work with Adyashanti's as well. They really seem to have a very similar approach. And that Adyashanti considers himself a teacher of enlightenment, though that's very different from what Scott does. And he is trying to get people to work skillfully with our minds and with our lives. And also to really recognize that the truth, like it says here, the truth is that you already are what you're seeking. So we don't have to go outside of ourselves. And that's the main tenet of yoga and of non-dual teachings, is that we are divine, or we do have this true nature of openness and joy, and that we don't have to find that somewhere outside of ourselves. It's not a dualistic teaching. It's a non-dual teaching, which says that we are what we're seeking. Eckhart Tolle, another probably the best well-known of the teachers, and he talks a lot about the present moment and how the present moment is all that we have. And again, we're getting into working with the tendencies of the mind, because the past or the future is just a memory or anticipation in your mind. And it's not real in the sense of we're not actually in the past and we're not actually in the future. What is real about it is that we are actually thinking about the past or the future in the present. And so in that sense, that it's real. But again, we're looking at this layer of associations and what's going on in the mind. When we're working with memories, we're working with something that's happened that doesn't feel resolved. And when we're working with future, we're working with something that we're worried that might happen, or perhaps we're fantasizing might happen. And that either one of those, especially when it comes to spiritual depth, is just a thought in the mind. So it's not actually helpful for us to be putting our attention there. And having said that, of course, that's where our attention always goes, to the thoughts in the mind. And I know all of us have had the experience of being very still and having a meditation or a practice where things have been quite quiet, and tuning into that stillness that is also there all the time. And then a big part of the reason that we work with the mind is to reduce the mental noise enough that we can access that. Muji is another teacher. I think he grew up in London, but I think he's originally from Jamaica. And he also studied with a guru in India who was quite influential in Western teachers. Andrew Cohen, Gangaji Muji, and several other people are his students. And his is a very direct path. And if you go to Muji TV, you'll find he just finished a whole series of spiritual, a group satsang over the last 2 or 3 weeks. I started watching a few of them this week just as I was getting ready for this, and it's always kind of a delight to watch him and to listen to him. And he just has people stand up and they say what's going on, and he talks to them about how to not be so engaged with the mind. And we're not turning against the mind, but the mind isn't all of who we are. So his basic premise is that we need to be really grounded in the stillness that's always here and in the absolute. And then from there is how we express in the relative world, or the manifest world. And then when we're able to do that, then he talks about the mind as kind of torturing us. And certainly that's been my experience, and I know many people do. But as we really connect with our being, what we're connecting with is stillness and spaciousness and oneness. And that when we're centered in the truth of that, then we're okay to stop planning our lives. So a lot of the issues that I know I've dealt with in my own personal life is around codependency. And I really felt like I needed things to be a certain way. Otherwise, I wasn't going to make it. Like I needed safety in my external world because I didn't have it internally, because my nervous system was traumatized as well. So he talks about and teaches about how to actually be really present. And if you watch some of his recordings, all of his stuff is free online. And as you watch it, you can kind of catch that what it is that he's working with. So he's another really interesting and valid spiritual teacher, very grounded in the absolute, and really loving and really clear too. He's not a pushover, but. And then Gangaji is a North American woman, one of the few kind of famous women teachers. This seems to be a game where the men get up there on stage and talk about it, and the women are less doing that less. She's also a student of the same teacher, and she talks a lot about just being very present. She keeps bringing people back again and again and again to presence and to not follow the mind, and that to get in touch with the core of ourselves. And she has an organization. She has a radio show where you can listen to a lot of her things on there too. And that underneath all of our obsessions and plans and underneath all of our emotions is peace. A lot of her teaching is to help people to stop identifying so much with what's going on in the layer of the mind and the emotion, and to actually come back. Another way that her teaching really aligns with the living inquiries as well is that this thing about being willing to suffer, even just for an instant without trying to escape. That's exactly what we're doing when we're coming into our body, when we're feeling the energy, when we're being present with what our experience is without running away from it. So again, very much aligned. I was really struck by, I know it's the particular people that I chose to look at are the ones that align with my own philosophy on it. But I was really struck at how common, in fact, these all are. And then Adyashanti talks about true meditation. When I teach meditation, mostly what we work with at first is the breath and the body and relaxing the body, and then we work with the thoughts in the mind. And oftentimes, because there's so much going on in those, we really need to have that. We need to work on that level. We need to work on the level of our thoughts. My shoulders used to be up around my ears, so I had to learn how to relax them. And we need to work on that level. And there's also and also a very valid approach to being in awareness that just goes directly there. And so some of the practices that we're going to do are going to be to go directly there. And in our morning practices or when you're doing meditation, a lot of what we're doing is we're going, okay, whatever it is that's going on in the mind, I'll work with that at certain times, but right now it's not the time to be focusing on thoughts in the mind. I'm going to set those aside. And then as much as we can set them aside, then we're able to experience the silence. It's hard to get anywhere without finding the quiet. It's not an instant process for most of us. And when people have a big awakening experience, which some people do, it tends to not last in terms of the mind. The mind tends to come back on board. And, that does seem to be human nature. And there's quite a drive from our survival system, I think, to really pay attention to the mind. It feels like we need to know what's happening and we need to plan ahead and otherwise we're going to die. It's that level of intensity. I don't mean to make fun of it because it's not really actually that funny. States of consciousness aren't everything. So, if we have a state of consciousness of being completely wrapped up in worry, that's not as pleasant as a state of consciousness as being, filled with joy and bliss. And so as human beings, we all want to go for the pleasure and we want to avoid pain. That's how we're made. And that's fine, right? But we can't get back to an experience. So that's a lot of the caution around don't go after experiences, is because if I've had an experience of bliss or something, and I noticed that what happened is this has happened about, 15 years ago. There was a strong experience in a retreat. And after that, I would start to feel it coming back. And as soon as I started to feel it coming back, my mind would go, oh, there it is. And then it would be gone because you can't think these things in. It's an experience that you're having, right? And so I learned, and from kind of the hard way, that I needed to stop going, oh, there it is, and just let that thought go, and then just be present to whatever it is that was happening. But Adyashanti talks about how you get used to anything. And so that's another element of it too, is that, when the first 10 years that I was doing yoga and meditation, I got used to having relaxed shoulders. And then something happened that was really traumatizing, and my shoulders were like this. And then I had to practice it quite a lot again to get them to relax again. And as I worked with, what was underlying it, then they just started to naturally relax. So that's part of it too, I think, is that we just get used to whatever it is that's going on. And if that's, a state of peace and joy and quiet, then it's not as sexy as it was at the beginning. It's just not, it's just like, okay, this is the new thing. And one thing that one of my teachers said early on was that whatever we let go of, whatever kind of layer of misconception and ignorance that we let go of, we don't actually remember very clearly what it was like. So we might remember that we felt that way, but once that veil has been lifted, then we don't actually have that thinking pattern anymore. And so it just kind of, once it lets go, it's actually let go. And the other thing I would say about that is that some people seem to retain the knowledge of oneness. A lot of times those experiences are an experience of non-duality, of non-separation. And some people will remember that, and other people will forget that. And so we might remember it as an experience, but we might not retain the learning out of it. It's the seeking itself that obscures the stillness. It's a practice of watching content arising from the space that it's arising in. And so we'll just do it for maybe 5 or 10 minutes. And in particular, I was thinking it might be kind of interesting or fun, or however we would say that, to look at what it is that we think Like, how would you know that you are awake or enlightened? Like, what experiences would there be, or what would there not be, or would there be, what state of mind would you be in? Would all of our problems disappear? Like, what exactly do we have in our minds? Because we all have something. Um, whether we believe it or not is another thing, but let's just do a little bit of inquiry around that, and then we'll see where that goes. Then we'll talk about it. So let yourself hold that question in the back of your mind for a moment as we tune in. Notice the space that your body is in, the space that your body is occupying. Notice your body head to toes. Notice your breathing, sensations, energy. Notice your experience on the level of body and energy. And notice that this is all occurring in space. Your thoughts, the sensations, your body is in a certain space. And then shift your attention so that you're witnessing what's happening in your body, in your mind, your breath. Noticing that there's a perceiving that's going on that's not physical, it's not in your thought stream. There's a watching of what's going on. And notice that that watching could be experienced as happening in a space. So there's a space of awareness itself. And for the next few minutes, we'll just go back and forth between the content and the space of it, of perceiving, and that kind of larger space in which it's being perceived, without, of course, getting all heady about it. It's kind of hard, but so drop into that space. Put your attention mostly on the space of awareness and of the witnessing. And notice what's here right now. What are the qualities of this space or this experience? And then watch as thoughts come in. Watch as thoughts come in around this question that we've been looking at. What is enlightenment? What is it to be awake? How would I know if I'm there? And maintain that awareness of it. Maintain the awareness that you're watching it. And thought comes in as words sometimes, as images. Let yourself get involved in the thoughts that are coming in and see if you can maintain the witness as well. And then let the thoughts move to the background for a minute and focus entirely now on the space of awareness. Without any narrative about anything at the moment. See if you can focus just on whatever stillness is here, whatever your being, your consciousness, that space. At some point, thoughts will come back in. Notice the thoughts now. This is content that's arising in the space. It's literally arising in the space around the brain. We're observing it. How would I know that I'm enlightened or awake, aware? What would be different? And then shift back into thought-free awareness, however that might develop or work for you right now. Let go of the thoughts as much as you can. You could still notice your body, your breath, you're still observing. Also put your attention on the space of awareness or on the stillness. On that which never changes. It's not seeking anything. And then notice that thought might be back. Notice the thought that you're observing, thought, and it might be pretty insistent. You might get carried away in a train of thought for a bit. And this time, notice, who would you be without your thoughts about yourself? When you think of who am I, there's all kinds of thoughts come up. There's the body, of course, there's our lives, there's our personality, our thoughts, our relationships, our interests. But if you didn't have any of those thoughts about you, what would be left? Who am I without my narrative about myself? Am I in a certain location? My body is in this space. Am I limited to my body? I'm not trying to really think it through, or just noticing. The body, just like the mind, is very insistent, has a lot of momentum. Is there more here than the body? Than my thoughts? And then notice that content comes up, and then we can still observe. We might get caught up in content, and then we move back and observe that it's happening. And then for another minute or so, let go of the content as much as possible and rest in whatever stillness or emptiness is here. One of the things I like about that practice is that it's clear that the space of awareness doesn't go anywhere. We just get focused on content for a bit. And then when we come back, we can sense some days, and some days, we can't because the mind is really intrusive. But a lot of the time we can sense that there's some stillness there. So that's a different experience than what we often have with the mind. Well, in the yoga tradition, when we talk about samadhi, the literal definition of samadhi refers to the buddhi. The dhi at the end is the buddhi, which is the mind, the higher level of the mind. The sama is just equilibrium, which is equilibrium in the mind. There's an article by Rick Hansen. He's a neuroscientist, brain guy, and he talks about in the Buddhist philosophy, and very much in terms of most spiritual practices, is that people who are more awake tend to not have hatred, greed, attachment sticking to them so much, and that there's more calm and peace, there's more freedom from compulsions, and that all of those things are quite practical in a way. Yeah, they're not states of extreme bliss or something, that there's a lot more stillness there. I don't care about enlightenment so much as I care about, is my mind a healthy environment for me to live in? And if not, how can I work with that to improve its health? Can anybody touch back into that right now, that stillness, whatever your experience was during the practice? So Scott talks about ongoing practice of just a few seconds of rest, just touching back in to whatever the deepest stillness is. And just in terms of thought, there's always at least a few seconds of thought-free awareness when we tune into that, and then hopefully a little bit longer most of the time. But just to stay with that, and then notice when a new thought comes up, and then just notice that and let it have whatever life it has, and then come back to resting again. And when we do that, those moments gradually expand, and we start to have the experience of more relaxation and calm in the mind, less compulsion. And I don't think it really occurs to most people to just stop and be silent. And part of the reason why we don't, I think, is because when we stop and we're silent, the mind comes in and goes, blah, 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 blah. And we're like, holy cow, I need to do something to get out of that. It's a mess in there. And then we, then we move away from it. And then we get back to, the nervous system and all of that too, that there seems to be a resistance to not noticing everything that's going on. And we get really wrapped up in it. I think a lot of that has to do with our hormones, our nervous system. We just have that compulsion as physical bodies, with brains and nervous systems, to keep track of that. And if we've had trauma, of course, then we're really keeping track of it, which makes it a lot harder to just set that aside and recognize that there's anything else too. Our minds can make almost anything happen in our bodies. And, all of us have had experiences of working with sensation. And, we'll be fine. We'll be going along fine. And all of a sudden something will trigger us, and we've got this sensation in our gut, or we've got a headache, or we've got something going on. And, our minds and our bodies are all one system. It's really foolish kind of to think that we could separate them out the way we sometimes like to, but yeah. One of the really important ones, of course, is the witness. What was people's experience when we were looking at who would I be without my story about who I am? A lot of spiritual practices are meant to move us beyond the obsession with our stories and our minds and our thoughts, and get us to kind of stops our mind. Who would I be without my narrative about myself? It's like, oh, okay, that's a story. Okay, here's another one. But if I let all that go, then who am I? Well, and a lot of times we spend a lot of time decorating our house and, trying to help the thoughts become more positive. And I think all of those things are really useful, actually. If we've got a lot of worry or anxiety, or if we're really unkind to ourselves, then let's practice kindness and let's work with letting those kinds of thoughts go. And also tuning into what it is that's never harmed, that never thinks, that, that timeless essence of who we are. And to bring that in to our life, how are we going to do that? And it's actually not that hard. We just kind of have to pay attention to it. And that part can be hard, actually, being able to pay attention to it. But we all know how to do that. And we all do it. There's another element too, I think, that gets to the core of why it is that a lot of the times we won't be present with ourselves. And certainly some of it's going on in the nervous system. But for myself, part of what was going on about 10 years ago, I started doing a practice of looking to see if I was in alignment with my higher values. And the answer was a big no. I was totally wasting my life in a way, although I don't really believe that you can waste your life, but I wasn't in alignment with my higher values. I was marking time. And so I thought maybe we could just do a couple, 3 minutes on that and just, look at that. Because if we're not happy with what's going on in our lives, or if we don't have any sense of meaning, then all kinds of things come from that. So we can have issues going on in our lives because we have something wrong physically or mentally or emotionally, or in our circumstances, we're grieving about somebody, or, there's all kinds of things that happen in our lives. But if we have an overriding sense of purpose, or if we have a sense of meaning or alignment or out of alignment, that makes a big difference in terms of just how we feel about our lives and if we need to escape them or not. Because a difficult life isn't necessarily what has to be escaped. Sometimes it's a life that's not in alignment or that's not meaningful to us. So let's take a few minutes and tune into that. Close your eyes and come into your body. Already just probably hearing those words alignment in the last minute or so, I brought up a few things. Tune in and notice what comes up, and I'm going to just be quiet while you do that. And notice if there's an element of planning popping in. My life is out of alignment. What do I need to do to get it back in? How's that going to work? See if you can let go of that. that level of thinking about it right at the moment. Notice what's happening on a more subtle level. And notice if it's an easy thing to pay attention to, or if the mind wants to go off somewhere else. Notice your breath. And notice the space in which all of that is happening. And then set that aside. That's a practice that this could be done in a longer period of time. Obviously, it's not a long period of time, just 2 or 3 minutes like that. That was my experience too, and it does explain a lot of addiction and a lot of getting away. And it is painful to look at something and go, what is my alignment? What would that look like? And what do I need to do? But also, can I hold myself with some kindness around it? Because we can get off track for all kinds of reasons. And oftentimes it's not even bad reasons. It's just kind of things that happen to us. And then we end up where we're not really in an environment where it's supportive, or we're not, for me, I needed to leave a relationship. Certainly that's not the case for everybody, but that was what I needed to do. And I did. And now I feel like I'm in alignment, because now I can do what I need to do without being ridiculed for it. And so, that says something about the relationship that I was in. But it was hard because it was a long-term relationship, and there's a lot going on that I had to change in order to make that happen. One of the things that many of the teachers talk about, and I've noticed, I certainly would never call myself enlightened either. What I've noticed though is over the last few years, especially the last 5 years of more space for practice and more clarity and healing a lot of the trauma that used to really be triggering me all the time, is that I don't feel I need to control my life the way I used to. And so that last bit about control and planning is, why do we need to do that? For the most part, it's so that we feel more secure. And a lot of that is a nervous system thing, of course. And there's certainly a level at which we need to take care of business. We need to have enough money to eat and have a home and be in a safe environment, certainly all of that. And then a lot of the kind of attempt to control my environment was around needing to be kind of emotionally fed by other people. And, that's the root of codependency, obviously. It's not a very healthy environment to be living in. And so as I started to really nourish myself through my own practices and heal the trauma that was kind of always triggering me and holding me back, then I noticed that I don't any longer feel like I need to make a bunch of plans for how things are going to go, that I'm much more comfortable with just letting things come as they do. And I trust myself a lot more too. When I first left my partner, I decided I was going to be celibate for a year. And it was basically because I didn't trust myself not to get into a relationship that was the same. And then about 6 months in, I went, no, this is a 3-year thing. So I made a commitment. And when I was working with Scott at the center, he's just like, really? You need like a vow of celibacy to make sure that you're not going to screw up again? Like, don't you trust yourself just to notice what's going on? And I'm like, clearly I don't. Otherwise it wouldn't even occur to me, So we did some inquiry onto that, and I was able to let that go. But a lot of the real triggers for things are things that some unconscious fear or some lack of trust or We look back at our lives. I look back and I go, I was so unconscious. I got into all these situations. So I'm afraid it's going to happen again. But I'm a completely different person than I was back then. I don't actually have to worry about that anymore. So sometimes it's good to update our files so we recognize where we're at now. What I'd like to do now is take about 2 minutes if everyone has something they could write on, and if you don't, you could do it as a mental note. I'd like just to go back over the last just about 90 minutes now and think about what it is that you'd like to take forward, to bring forward into your life from this. And you'll get the recording and the PDF too, so you don't have to worry you're going to miss something. So just whatever comes to your mind, and take a couple of minutes to make a note of that and write it down, and then we'll talk about that. And then as you're going through your week coming up, if you could read that over to yourself at least once a day, and just for the next week, and just to remind yourself what it is that really